Now we move to supply analysis, and we are still talking about perfectly competitive markets. When market prices increase, firms supply greater quantities. So this should be rather obvious. Another obvious remark is that the market supply is the sum of the supply curves of the individual firms. And Exhibit 5 in the curriculum illustrates this. I think the concept is really simple, plus we've talked about it earlier, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. All I'll say is that if you have, let's say, two firms, A and B, and let's say these are the only two firms in the market, they will have a particular supply function each, then the market supply function is simply the sum of these two supplies. And again, this is something that we have seen in an earlier reading. Section 3.3, optimal price and output in perfectly competitive markets. In order to come up with the equilibrium price or the market price, we need to combine the market demand function with the market supply function. If this is our market demand, so that, let's say, is given like this, and as we have done throughout this reading, we have price on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis. So if this is our demand and this is our supply function, we simply equate them, come up with the quantity. Let's say that when we come up with that quantity, it is 38.57. This is from the curriculum. And over here, the price is 5.71. What this means is that in this particular market, the equilibrium price is 5.71, and all individual firms in this market basically have to sell at 5.71. The individual firms are market takers. If a firm tries to sell for $6, nobody will buy from that particular firm. Continuing with the concept of optimal price and output, and here again I want to emphasize a point. The optimal price, when we talk about perfectly competitive markets, this optimal price is defined by the market, and every company will take that price. In the example that we are considering, that price is 5.71. But firms also need to figure out how much to produce. So if I am one particular firm, I need to figure out what quantity to produce. This is not going to be defined by the market, because as far as the market is concerned, I can sell as much as I want. If I sell one orange of 5,000 oranges, I'll be selling each orange for this particular amount. My optimal output is going to be based on my cost curves, which we talked about in the previous reading. So again, let's have a dollar figure, which is cost on the y-axis now, and we have quantity on the x-axis. Let's say that I'm a particular firm and this is my marginal cost curve. This is my average total cost curve. Notice that the marginal cost curve intersects the average total cost curve at the minimum, and we talked about this in the previous reading. Our price is 5.71. We are an individual firm in a perfectly competitive market, so 5.71 is the price that we have to take. We are a price taker. Now this particular price is also our marginal revenue, because every additional orange that we sell, we will be selling for 5.71. This is also our average revenue, because if we sell 100 oranges, we will be selling the 100 oranges for 571. 571 over 100 would give us 5.71. So our price is the same as marginal revenue, is the same as average revenue, and this is also our demand curve. We have a perfectly elastic demand curve. If we sell one orange, we'll sell it for 5.71. If we want to sell 10,000 oranges, we can sell them at 5.71 per orange. If we try to sell oranges for $6 each, then we will not be able to sell any. So this is a horizontal or perfectly elastic demand curve. Now, what is the quantity that will help us maximize our profit? We've done this several times, and here we'll do it again. The profit is maximized when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and the reason has been discussed in the previous reading. So this is our marginal revenue curve. This is our marginal cost curve. This is the quantity at which we will maximize our profit. Let's say that this quantity is 100. So we will sell 100 oranges, each for 5.71, and this is where we maximize our profit. What is the link between a firm's supply and marginal cost curve? This is an important question. Now think about it. Notice that 5.71 is the price and our quantity is 100, which we got based on the marginal cost curve. If for some reason the price of oranges goes up, let's say there is a favorable news report that drinking orange juice improves your health, market demand goes up, market price goes up to, let's say, $6. How much will you supply? You will now supply this much. Let's say the price for some reason keeps going up. And notice that the amount that you will produce will go up based on the marginal cost curve. So there seems to be a relationship between the marginal cost curve and the supply that your firm will produce. So in a sense, they are similar. But are they exactly the same? Not quite, because let's say that for some reason the price comes down. Say the market is flooded with grapefruits and the price of oranges comes down. Say the price of oranges comes down to 4 now. Will you produce? Will you sell oranges? The answer is no, because now the money that you get from oranges, 4 per orange, is less than your cost. Let's say that your cost per orange is 5. And for simplicity here, let's just say that our fixed cost is essentially 0. So our average total cost, let's say, is approximately the same as the average variable cost. So if the market price is 4 and the cost per orange is 5, then it makes no sense to sell oranges. So there will be 0 supply. That means that your supply function is the marginal cost curve as long as we are above the average cost. Next question, what is the economic profit? Now let's go back to our original situation where the market price is 5.71. Are we making a profit? In this particular case, yes we are, because what is our revenue? Our revenue is the price times quantity. So our revenue is 100 into 5.71, which is 571. That happens to be this particular area. What is our cost? This is our average total cost curve. So let's say that the cost is 5. This area over here, this smaller rectangle, represents our cost. So our economic profit is given by this region over here. Since the price is greater than the average total cost, we are making an economic profit in the short run. One final point before I go to the next slide. Generally, cost curves are U-shaped because of the law of diminishing returns, and this is something we saw in the previous reading, but I'll just mention it again. Generally, if you sell just one orange, then your cost per orange is likely to be high. As you sell more and more oranges, your cost per orange tends to be lower. But after reaching a certain minimum, if you keep trying to sell more and more oranges, your curve or your cost will go up, and that explains this U-shape. But it is not necessary that the cost curve is U-shaped for every single firm. It's just that this is the most typical scenario. What are the factors which impact long-run equilibrium in perfectly competitive markets? The scenario that we just saw gave us an economic profit which is greater than zero. When this happens, then other firms will enter the market. And in terms of a supply-demand analysis, here is what's going on. So price quantity, here we are talking about the market. So initially, if we have this situation where we have a certain market demand curve, a certain market supply curve, and let's say we are at 5.71, if a price of 5.71 enables firms to earn an economic profit, then more firms will enter the market. When more firms enter the market, the supply curve will shift to the right, and notice what happens to the price. The price will come down. Let's say the price comes down to 5. So price down. Now what happens to an individual firm's demand curve? Remember, the demand curve earlier was at 5.71. Now it will come down. So before you go on, I want you to do this. Show the original demand curve at 5.71 and show the average total cost curve and the long run marginal cost curve, and then show what happens when the price goes down to 5. So here is what is going on. This is our original mark where we are at 5.71. That's the marginal revenue. The original quantity that a firm produces is over here, because this is where profit is maximized. Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and this is the cost per orange. Therefore, we have a economic profit given by this rectangle. Now, because firms are entering the market, the price comes down to 5. So the price curve, which is the same as the marginal revenue curve, will shift down, and eventually it will come to 5 when the marginal revenue is at 5, and this particular curve is then touching the average total cost curve over here. Then economic profit will be 0. So notice that over here, cost per orange is the same as revenue per orange, and therefore the economic profit is 0. This is the long run equilibrium. Notice that at this particular stage, there will be no additional firms that enter the market because there are no more economic profits to be made. If for some reason we end up over here, then firms will exit the market, supply will decrease, and we will come back over here. So in perfectly competitive markets, firms will enter or leave such that in the long run, the economic profit is 0. You might get a question on the exam where you are given information like this and you are asked at what price will firms enter the market, and what you then need to look for is this point over here. So in this particular example, if you are given the average total cost equation and the marginal revenue equation, for example, you can see at what quantity or what price the two are the same. And actually this is the point where the marginal cost is also intersecting. So notice that in the long run, marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue is equal to average total cost, and this is also the price. So in the long run, this is our equilibrium point. If for some reason the price goes above this, then new firms will enter. If the price is below, then firms will exit. If you have time, I encourage you to read this little excerpt in the curriculum. Section 4, monopolistic competition. Here are the characteristics which have been taken from the curriculum, and I want you to read these. These have been discussed earlier when we looked at the summary slide showing all 4 types of market structures. The most important aspect of a market which is characterized by monopolistic competition is that firms try to differentiate their products, and this typically happens through marketing and advertising. Firms want consumers to believe that their products are different and better than the competitors' products in some way, and therefore with monopolistic competition we will see downward sloping demand curves. Section 4.1, Demand Analysis in Monopolistically Competitive Markets. As I just mentioned, we will have a downward sloping demand curve for each firm. And the way you can think of this is as follows. Let's take the market for toothpaste. If you have a company like Sensodyne, which has established a certain brand, and let's say consumers believe that by using Sensodyne toothpaste, their toothaches will go away, then clearly consumers value the toothpaste and are willing to pay a certain amount for the benefit of using that toothpaste. But having said that, a company like Sensodyne will have a downward sloping demand curve, because if they place a very high price or they set a very high price for their product, then consumers will not buy. As they reduce the price, the demand will increase. So let's say that this is the demand curve faced by a particular company such as Sensodyne. And as we have normally done, we will have quantity on the x-axis. So we are on this picture, we are looking at demand, marginal revenue, as well as 2 different cost curves. We'll put a dollar over here. Depending on which graph we are looking at, either we are looking at a cost or demand or marginal revenue. So let us say that this is the demand curve for our product, which is Sensodyne toothpaste. The marginal revenue curve, as we've seen before, will be downward sloping and it will be steeper than the demand curve. The profit maximizing quantity is always at the point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So what price will be charged? Notice that this is where marginal revenue and marginal cost intersect. So this must be the quantity at which profit is maximized. What then is the profit? If this is the quantity, at this quantity consumers are willing to pay this price over here. So this will be the price that is set by the company. So I'll say P for price, MC for monopolistic competition. Next question is, what is the profit? If this is the price, this is the quantity, then this rectangle over here represents the revenue. For the cost, we read off the average total cost curve. So the total cost is given by this region, which means that this is the economic profit. Supply analysis and optimal price and output. As we've just discussed, the output is based on this expression. We have a profit maximizing output when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. As we just saw, the price is calculated based on the demand curve, or we should say the price is determined based on the demand curve. With monopolistic competition, the supply function is not well defined. And to understand this point, let's see, or let's refresh our memory in terms of what happened with perfect competition. If you recall, with perfect competition, the supply function was based on the marginal cost curve. So as long as the marginal cost was more than the average variable cost, in the short run, we said that a firm would produce. How much would it produce or how much would it supply? That amount would simply be based on the marginal cost curve, because in perfect competition, we have a flat marginal revenue curve. So whatever price is given by the market, that becomes the marginal revenue curve for a given firm. And then the supply will be based on marginal cost as long as the marginal cost is greater than the average variable cost. With monopolistic competition, we have a downward sloping marginal revenue curve, so we can't do the same analysis. The supply then is not as nicely defined as we have over here, and the curriculum points out over here, as well as with subsequent market structures, that the supply function is not well defined. The prices are higher and the quantity is lower relative to perfect competition, and we'll see how this happens in the long run. So now section 4.4 deals with factors affecting long-run equilibrium in monopolistically competitive markets. In the long run, the economic profit will be zero. Why is this? The reason is, if a firm is earning an economic profit which is greater than zero, then other firms will enter the market. Remember that one of the characteristics here is that there are low barriers to entry, which means that new firms can enter rather easily. If new firms can enter rather easily, then the demand curve for each particular company in this market will go down. What will happen then is, if this demand curve goes down relative to what it used to be, so let's say this is the original demand curve, and now the demand curve as seen by a particular company comes down, notice that the demand curve will now be touching the average total cost over here. And let's see what is happening at equilibrium. Again, y-axis is a dollar figure depending on what curve we are looking at. Either it is a cost or demand or revenue. So profit maximizing amount still is the point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. At this particular quantity, the price that will be charged is over here. This is the price that will be charged in a monopolistically competitive market. But what about the cost? Notice that at this point we are also touching the average total cost curve. So if the price is the same as the average total cost, then the economic profit is zero. How does this compare with perfect competition? Remember, in perfect competition, in equilibrium, we will be at this point. So in a perfectly competitive market, the quantity would be higher. So this is the quantity with perfect competition. This is the quantity with monopolistic competition. So in perfect competition, we'll be at a higher number. Also notice that the price with monopolistic competition is higher than the price that we would have in a perfectly competitive market. So both price is higher with monopolistic competition and quantity is lower. Is this good or bad? It might seem bad on the surface, but remember that with monopolistic competition, we get variety. And in a sense, we might say that consumers are paying for that variety. So the jury is out as to whether it is better or not better for a market to be monopolistically competitive as opposed to perfectly competitive.